What is up, fellow thermonuclear AFers? I am Dan Valley coming at you very quickly before we get into our San Antonio Spurs look ahead with Noah Magaro-George. Great conversation as always. Wanted to just quickly address the latest Miles Bridges stuff, especially because the news sort of broke while Grant and I were doing the East over-unders, so I didn't want to make it seem like we were glossing over it. We recorded beforehand and I think we did make a note of it, but at the time, I think I thought there was just the new or an arrest warrant had been issued that was stemming from January. I didn't think it materially changed anything about his situations. I still probably should have recorded an intro after the fact before we published it. So that's my mistake if anyone thought that we were glossing over it. However, on Thursday, we also found out that in addition to that warrant that the Hornets, by the way, claim they didn't know about, which if the warrant was sealed, I have heard and read that they wouldn't necessarily know about it. But I also know that NBA teams have extensive resources and security personnel that used to do some like really serious shit that could probably find out if they wanted to. We also know that the Hornets are notoriously cheap when it comes to sort of running the franchise. So maybe they didn't actually know about it. But I think the bigger thing here, and look, the arrest warrant, it's a big deal. Like his initial accused of assaulting Michelle Johnson, the mother of his, I think they have two children together. I think that came to light in May 2022. There was photographic evidence of it. Horrific. He's supposed to be serving the balance of a 30-game suspension this season. There are 10 games left because he pleaded no contest to felony domestic violence. The Hornets, then he signed his qualifying offer to stay with the Hornets. He will be in unrestricted free agent after this summer. We are now getting after this season, excuse me. But we got word on Wednesday, this is per ESPN's Baxter Holmes, that a criminal summons was issued for Miles Bridges for violating a domestic violence protective order, misdemeanor child abuse, and injury to personal property. ESPN had obtained a copy of the report. The alleged incident that led to the summons being issued occurred around 9 p.m. on October 6th. So this was a week ago as I record this at Bridges' private residence in Charlotte. According to the police report, the criminal summons itself describes a series of events during a custody exchange between Bridges and his former girlfriend, with whom he has two children. Bridges is accused of throwing billiard balls at her vehicle while the children were inside it, smashing the windshield and leaving dents in the car. He is also accused in the summons of threatening her that if she, quote, told the police, he would take everything from her and withhold child support, end quote, and that he, quote, allowed his current girlfriend to yell, scream, and kick the victim's car while the children were inside it. The summons does not say if the woman was in the car. Holmes goes on to note about the unserved arrest warrant for Bridges that was issued all the way back in January for violating domestic violence protective order. Again, it was not immediately available because as of Wednesday night, it had not yet been served. I don't really know the logic behind that. There were people, I think I read something from one of the local Charlotte outlets that they couldn't locate him or something. I don't know why it took so long to be issued, but that itself was bizarre. This is just horrific shit. And my first reaction, and it's maybe it's not disgusting, but it was the Hornets have to get rid of this dude. Like it's just, even if you believe in a redemption arc from here, he's clearly not showing remorse, or he's now engaging in recurring behavior. And he did change his profile picture on Twitter to Johnny Depp, which is just, if you actually have nothing to hide or nothing to defend yourself against, that's exactly the first action that you're going to do. So that reaction though is just, it's unsettling to have. Like, oh, the Hornets should get rid of him. There's literally like, and we didn't have all the details at first, but for even I want to use myself here because I don't want to be shitting all over everybody. But for my first reaction, be like, they have to get rid of this dude. That's not even what this is about. I'm not saying he's got to go. I mean, like at this point, he has to go. But there were kids alleged like in the car during these alleged incidents where there's billiard balls being thrown at it, where his other girlfriend is kicking the car and screaming at them. And just the fact that Michelle Johnson and most notably the children have been put in these repeated instances of danger is harrowing, inexcusable, and it's a fundamental failure. And that seems to get implied. Where it's, well, that's implied. That shit is terrible and it shouldn't be happening. That's why we're mentioning that the Hornets need to get rid of him, or that Miles Bridges, people call him they're going to call him names and use profanity like I just did because they're passionate about the subject. That's the stuff that should be implied. I mean, the accountability shouldn't necessarily be implied because it's clear that he hasn't necessarily had to be held accountable in a meaningful or acceptable way just yet. And so it's fine to talk about that. But like, I want the first reaction to be like, well, let's talk about the safety of these children and Michelle Johnson as well. And it's not. And too many of us, and it's just myself included, are just so alarmingly ill-equipped to not even just cover this, but react to it. And so I will monitor, see how the situation plays out. But like I said, I didn't want anyone to think that we were glossing over it. The allegations are just absolutely horrific. And yes, if they are true, he just absolutely has to go. And he does not deserve the benefit of the doubt here. This isn't an innocent until proven guilty situation when you have when there are photographic evidence of the injuries he inflicted upon the mother of his two children over a year ago. At this point, like you don't get the benefit of the doubt after that happened, when there's this now proven pattern of behavior, even if some of these details like change from here on out. So a heart goes out to Michelle Johnson, the children's, but this is just absolutely awful. And it's so much bigger than basketball. There is no natural segue for this. Let's get to talking with Noah Magaro-George about the San Antonio Spurs. What is crack-lacking, fellow thermonuclear AFers? I am Dan Favale, coming at you with another 2023-2024 NBA season look ahead. We're on to the San Antonio Spurs, and I am joined by, for a third time, making his third appearance on the HardwoodKnocks podcast, which means it's officially his fault. He can say yes twice and it be a mistake, but he's now said yes a third time. Noah Magaro-George. Follow him on Twitter at @N_Magaro, Magaro. He is the editor-in-chief of AirAlamo and host of Alamo City Limits podcast. Noah, third time. Thank you so much for coming back. How are you doing?
Great. Yeah, I'm happy to be here for a third time. I think you're right. The first two might have been an accident. The third one is definitely on purpose. But no, for real, I've had a great time doing these with you. Happy to talk about the Spurs with you. A lot's going on. The season's about to start. Got back from my honeymoon. I'm married now. So like, life is great. Life is super great. I'm really excited for the season, excited for life. I'm ready to talk Spurs basketball.
I'm glad you said your honeymoon and wedding, because I wasn't going to mention anything unless you did, because I don't know if people keep this stuff a secret. So congratulations on the wedding, the honeymoon. I hope you're able to refresh. We know that the Devin Vassell extension ruined everything for you, though. So, but yes, thank you so much for coming back. I'm excited. Last time we talked, it was the Spurs had won the Wemby sweepstakes, but they didn't yet have Wemby. And so now we're kind of we were talking about theories, but now they've gone through the offseason and they've played some preseason basketball. There's more of like, not a concrete feel, but like it's just more entertaining and more meaningful.
It's real, yeah.
Right now. Yeah, I mean, he's there. It's real. It happened. So I want to start, before we get to him, were there any just general thoughts, takeaways, observations, impressions from their offseason that are sticking with you or that you're still munching on leading into the regular season?
Yeah, the only thing that I feel like I was really surprised by during the offseason so far is that they just bought out Reggie Bullock and like let him go. Because, I mean, Reggie Bullock seemed to be all on board with the team. He was like promoting them on social media. He was interacting with all the young guys. He was talking about being excited to play with Sochan and Vassell and Wemby and Keldon. And he showed up to some of their, like philanthropic events. And so it felt like he was a part of the team. And then they just bought him out and he's gone. And I felt like he was a guy who, at least having watched him play with the Mavericks the last couple of seasons, he, I think, has been a little bit on the decline, but feels like he might have been able to yield like a first-round pick. I mean, like Thaddeus Young got you a first-round pick and he didn't play at all. So I just feel like they could have gotten something for Reggie, but I don't know. Like it felt like, oh, they're doing him a favor maybe, but he landed with the Rockets. Like I don't really know what that move was, but it's not super consequential. So it's not like I'm really bothered by it. You know what I mean?
Right. And I was actually shocked by that. At first I thought, oh, okay, like they still have their room exception. So he was just going to get the Spurs waive him. They do him a solid. He's going to get then extra money from the Rockets. But no, he signed for the minimum, I believe, unless I'm mistaken, in Houston.
No, you're right.
So I just don't I don't understand. I looked up immediately. I was like, is he from Houston? And I like, what is So I have no idea what the theory was, but I was shocked that they just bought him out because he historically doesn't start making shots until the games probably would have stopped mattering for the Spurs at that point in the season. But like even just having this salary and the idea of the floor spacing and just like another wing, I was pretty shocked. I was not surprised at really anything else they did. What did you sort of make? And I know you weren't surprised because we had talked about this, but would you have liked to have seen them done anything to like maybe bring in an impact veteran, or was it just, well, it would have been nice if they just would have kept Reggie Bullock because they kind of fit the mold of that. Like you didn't need them to make the bigger swing, but they very much made it clear that like, no, we're taking the full on gradual approach here.
Yeah, no, I think I'm fine with everything that they did with the offseason. Like Brian Wright had talked about it pretty much all summer, like when he was on NBA TV. Trying to think of the other broadcasts he was on, like during Summer League and stuff like that. But yeah, they just wanted to take it slow, like one step at a time. We're going to build organically. They made it clear we're not trading Devin Vassell. We're not trading Keldon Johnson. We're not going to, try to move up in the draft. And like, it felt like they established this is what we're doing. They held true to their word. And really, honestly, the Reggie Bullock thing is the only thing that surprised me. Like, I really thought it was going to be Cedi Osman that got the boot, but apparently they really like him. And he really wants to be a Spur, and he's excited about the prospect. I mean, who wouldn't be, like, of playing with Wemby? But yeah, just that was the only thing that surprised me. But again, like, nothing bothered me. It made sense. And I'm okay with them not taking a big swing because, like, who were the big swings this offseason that were really going to make a huge impact for this team? I really don't think anyone. I know some people were intrigued by Austin Reeves, but I'm okay if they, they didn't go after
I think I
him.
might have even told you when you were on. I just wanted some team, any team, to force the Lakers to pay more than they had to. Like, I think so.
Yeah.
I was a little bit, but I didn't. I think this. I actually probably would have been fine with his fit on the Spurs. They were not my favorite team for him, but you're right. There wasn't a big swing out there. Although, were they? Unless I'm imagining it, they were one of the teams at first where Dame was like intrigued by. Right? Was that him, or am I misremembering the star? No, it was the Spurs.
Yeah, no, I think it was Dame. I think he said something along the lines of like he had the utmost respect for the Spurs and he would be intrigued to play for Coach Popovich. But like, I don't know. I feel like we've heard that from other stars. It's not really like signaling they want to be in San Antonio. It's just like, I'd love to play for Pop. And, I think Team USA was that outlet for a lot of guys. And most of these guys are probably fine not to play for Pop as long as they're making money and competing for championships. And like the Spurs just aren't in that position to do that right now.
I will say maybe the most surprising move to me actually was the Greg Popovich 5-year extension. I know how coaching contracts work, and I know Monty Williams reset the per year market, but just like seeing the 5-year extension, I was like, wasn't this guy was like talking about leaving with Tim Duncan like just a few years ago, and now it's, I'm signing. I don't care if he's not there for the end of it. I was like, the 5-year extension I was just like, it's pretty cool. And I was like, look, the Wemby effect is in full force. Like Greg Popovich is signing a 5-year extension. The Wemby shit is real.
Yeah, no, it was crazy to see him do that because you're right. It was like, okay, I'm leaving with Tim Duncan. Then he said the same thing about LaMarcus Aldridge. He said the same thing about DeMar DeRozan. He had like the opt-out clause every year of that previous contract and he stuck around. So it's like, maybe he does stick it out for the whole 5 years and he really wants to see the beginning of this whole Wembanyama era and whoever else they add along the way. So that was a little bit surprising to me too, but I'm pretty excited. I'm on board for it. He seems reinvigorated to be coaching a young team, teaching guys like, the fundamentals where it's a little bit different with like when you had Tim and David Robinson kind of already established. Like Timmy was all NBA coming into his rookie season. He was well polished. A lot of these guys still have a lot of work to do. So I'm excited to see kind of how Pop handles this and kind of the longer leash that he seems to be allowing the younger guys. Cause I'll tell you this much, Tony was getting yelled at all the time. Lonnie was getting yelled at all the time just a couple of years ago. And it seems like that's really not his MO anymore. Like Pop is really kind of maybe not chilled out completely, but it's a different style. He's adapted for sure.
When you were on the podcast last twice, because I just remember vividly, it happened with me and my co-host when we talked about what a Devin Vassell extension would look like. You and I bandied about numbers, and I think we talked like anywhere. We threw out 125, 140. There were Spurs fans in the YouTube comments that were like mad and thought it was egregious. And then it's funny because as soon as the deal gets done, like, and the team does it, it seems like all the fans are on board, like, because the team actually did. We don't know what we're talking about. We're just idiot podcasters and bloggers and writers. But once the team did it, it was smart. What did you think of the terms of the Devin Vassell extension? Did the number catch you off guard at all? Did you think it was super favorable to the team? Anything along those lines?
Yeah, I was caught off guard a little bit by how much they were paying for him. I think he's 100% worth it. Like, I'm very bought in on Devin Vassell. You know I like him a lot. I know you're very bought in on him as well. We're both really high on the guy. But yeah, it felt like that annual average value was a lot, especially for a guy who I think he missed 44 games last season. And like a lot of the games he played in last year, once he came back, he like clearly wasn't 100%.
Yeah.
But I think the trajectory he's been on year after year after year, the per game numbers have gone up, the points, the rebounds, the assists, the efficiency, from the field, from mid range, from three have gone up every single season. So if you envision him continuing upon that trajectory and maybe turning into I don't like to give like direct player comparisons, but like a Chris Middleton kind of player, like if that's who you think he can kind of be, then I think great value. Like that's insanely good value. Another note that's kind of fun, that's the most expensive contract they've ever handed out to any player ever in franchise history. So that's kind of a fun little like aside, I guess, because that's not going to be that way probably for much longer. I'm sure Wemby will get the super max
Jeremy
whenever that
Sochan's
comes
gonna
up.
get more in his extension, but
exactly.
the way that the cap is going. Although fun. Oh, by the way, so I'll throw this out there. I didn't say it on the last, but we talked about the Devin Vassell extension after it happened. I'm on board with the Chris Middleton comp, and I think you and I might have even mentioned that, like not in the previous podcast, but the first time we ever talked. The more I've watched him and pre-injury, there might just be more of a Devin Booker better defender outcome here, and I'm not ruling that out. And that's why I didn't bat an eye at the extension, other than I thought, could there be like a DeJounte Murray injury effect here? I know Devin Vassell wasn't dealing with as much serious stuff, but did that pull back his number at all? Then you dig into it. And do you know the largest percentage that his deal is ever going to be worth is the first season? It's projected to be worth 20.7% of the cap. And by the end of his deal, and there are no player options, he's projected to be making 13% of the salary cap. That's just like, you absolutely do that, even if you think he's going to be your third best player on the top iteration of your team. Like, that's just a no-brainer to me.
Exactly. Yeah, it is a no-brainer. And I think that's the perfect description for it, because he's not going to be eating a ton of your cap in the future. It gives you a lot of financial flexibility. And if you believe this guy can be, like we talked about, even if it's not the Devin Booker and it's somewhere in between Devin Booker and Chris Middleton, like that's a fantastic player. You want that guy on your roster every day of the week, especially for that kind of number. Like I think they got tremendous value. And just with the way the CBA changed, like before you had to offer the max to get that 5-year extension, it changed. You don't have to do that anymore. So they got 5 years out of Devin Vassell. They're going to have him for, presumably entering the heart of his prime. I'm excited to see what happens with this roster, but especially excited for Devin Vassell. That's my guy on the roster. I really believe in him. Obviously, I believe in Wemby, but if you made me choose who I believe in the most outside of him, it's got to be Vassell. It has to be.
It's the same for me. I do think there's a subset, and this isn't a criticism of them, as Spurs fans, that are just devoutly loyal to like the Keldon Johnson or even Jeremy Sochan over Devin Vassell, which I find a little puzzling, but like I won't, Keldon Johnson had like his trajectory was great. And now I have questions about his fit on this team, but I'm surprised at how many people don't think Devin Vassell is the second most important player long-term on this team, I guess, which just is a random anecdote. I was going to ask you, and I think we're probably, stepping on previously tread ground here, but like, what are you watching most closely for his development, or what's like the biggest thing he has to improve upon or add to his game if he's going to hit that kind of star ceiling? It feels like he has now.
Yeah, I think he's going to have to figure out just how to get more rim pressure. Like he kind of showed that a little bit last season where he was getting to the rim more often and he was finishing at the rim at a better rate, but really he doesn't like have a ton of drives to get all the way to the rim. Like he kind of historically since coming in the NBA has kind of struggled rounding the corner, but I think, he's made up for that by adding some muscle to his frame. He can kind of body guys out of his way, give those bumps, secondary bumps to create some space, dislodge guys on his way to the rim. So like, I'm excited to see kind of where does that go? Like that's intriguing for me. Does he add to that this season, or is he still going to be very mid-range heavy? And also, taking a ton of catch and shoot threes. I'd love to see him pull up more from three, because that's really something that no one on this roster right now, at least, projects to do very much. And like the Spurs have been near the bottom of the league and pull up 3-point percentage and pull up 3-point volume. Like, does he help them in that department? Does he grow in that area? So those would be kind of like my two areas that I'm watching for from him, because I think that really dramatically raises his ceiling if he's able to even implement those things at a little higher volume and efficiency than he has in the last couple of seasons.
And I think the other thing I'll be watching for too, and the rim pressure, just I wouldn't be able to add it. Rim pressure, and that would, I think, organically, then it's going to increase the time he spends at the free throw line as well, which is huge. And now that I've like seen more of Devin Booker and him, I'm kind of watching for like, will we see the turn of as the playmaker, where it's not just he's already like a really like he's really good at finding guys off of drives without getting all the way to the rim. So like imagine how much that opens up if he gets all the way to the rim. Are we going to see some more complicated passes? I was digging into his drive numbers and just like he had a 12% assist rate on drives with a turnover rate of just 4.5. Among every player who finished as many drives as him, the only other guys last season to have that were Monte Morris, Tyrese Halliburton, Chris Paul, and Fred VanVleet. Like that was it. That was Devin Vassell. Those guys reached those benchmarks. So I think he can do it, but I'm more looking at like when they're setting the ball screens for him, are we going to see maybe some more complicated reads at different levels, whether it's above the 3-point line, below the free throw line, near the basket. And I think that's like kind of the nitpicking you have to start doing with him because of how much he's shown like progressing as a scorer and even as a playmaker for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah. And like just having watched him last season, I think you could argue is like maybe his breakout year. I don't know that a lot of people outside of the Spurs fandom really watched him that much or the Spurs that much. I don't blame them. But like he wasn't making like corner skips. He wasn't like passing guys open. He wasn't manipulating the defense with his eyes or anything like that. It was mostly like basic reads, drive kick, one man away. Like it wasn't anything too advanced. So yeah, I'm also looking out for that as well. I'm glad that you pointed that out because that kind of goes hand in hand. Like if he's able to get more rim pressure, if he's able to collapse defenses a little bit better, is he able to capitalize on that by passing teammates open, by finding, different looks. So yeah, that's a great thing that you pointed out. That's definitely something people should watch out for.
What do you make of him defensively though? Like what is he? I know like I don't want to say they insulate him, but he spends a lot of time on what I would say are there may be some of the more like there are some times where he's on some really tough on-ball assignments, but it feels like he might be on like tougher off-ball assignments a lot of time, or I would classify as like the third option on any given team. Is there like I know they have Jeremy Sochan, who was like a guy that can just, you go check that. Now they have Wemby. So it's just like Devin Vassell, this is kind of the defensive role he's going to settle into, or is that still something you're kind of like, oh, can he go and like maybe check some of these caps lock stars?
Yeah, I kind of still envision him being like that free roamer, like the help defense, the guy who's kind of making those weak side rotations, guy who's hunting in the, the passing lanes, like a ball hawking free safety, if you will, almost, if you can put it in those terms for the NBA. I just don't see him like transitioning to that other role. He didn't really play that role at Florida State. He hasn't played that role for the Spurs. Like occasionally he will, check somebody who is, I guess, like the number one or number two scorer if they're like similarly sized to him. But I don't think that's like the best way to utilize him. I just think he's got such good off ball instincts that it makes sense to kind of let him roam and help rather than, force him to be on ball constantly trying to guard those guys who are like the elite scorers, the guys who you need to lock down. Like, I just don't think that's probably what we see from him. Can he do it a little bit? Maybe. Like, I think he has improved as an on-ball defender, but really the last couple of years, and this is also a product of the Spurs, like they've struggled defensively, so he hasn't been as impactful. Like, he just hasn't looked like his rookie season. I thought he looked really good. Last year, not so much. The year before that, he kind of tapered off a little bit as well. So I'm kind of interested to see, like, how does adding Wembanyama to the lineup change everything? Because it will. It'll change everything for everyone, but we'll see how much it changes it for Devin Vassell. And I don't know, man. I mean, I'm really bought into him on the defensive end as well. Like, I think can be super impactful. I think he can be a guy who's, coming up with deflections, getting those digs from the nail on drives and dislodging the ball and creating fast break opportunities. Like, I think he can be that, but we'll see about the on-ball stuff. I just don't know if I see that for him right now.
We've gone 17 plus minutes without talking about Victor Wembanyama, which is either a crime or an accomplishment, depending on how you look at it. Pop said he has no idea how he's going to use Wemby on offense, which I got a kick out of. How do you envision the Spurs using on offense? As I told you before we started, I don't watch a ton of preseason basketball. I try not to let it color like my overall impressions as I'm doing this outlooks. Are you taking anything away from that first game with how they're going to use him? Just what type of role or freedom do you expect him to have on the offensive end?
Yeah, that's really interesting because I know Pop, like you said, he was like, I don't really know how we're going to use him. And I know he was asked again. And I think yesterday he was saying, like, we're just kind of going to give him basically like free roam. Like, let's see what he can do. Let's see what he's comfortable. Let's see what he's good at. Like, and then we'll reevaluate. And I think that's probably like a good plan, right? Like, let's see what he can do. There are some things that I think I would stray away from. Like, I don't really want to see him dribbling the ball on the perimeter all that much, like self-creating. I don't like, to be honest with you, he's pretty weak. Like, he doesn't have like a strong base. He has a really high center of gravity. Like, people love seeing him with the ball in his hands and they love to see him like hitting a crossover behind the back. but his handle's really not that functional. Like, he's one of those guys who, like, for example, when I go to the gym and I do dribble moves, yeah, I can pull off a few dribble moves. I'm not going anywhere. Like, that's how I see Wemby a lot. Like, he can do some stuff with the ball in his hands, but that doesn't mean he's going anywhere. Like, he has a really hard time. Well, we talked about it with Vassell, and when you're as big as Wemby and your center of gravity is that insanely high, like, you have a hard time rounding the corner. You're going to have a hard time going through guys. Like, I know that he basically headbutted Chet Holmgren yesterday on the way to an and one, and, like, that was really, like, one of the two finishes he had, like, directly at the rim, I guess, self-creating, but I just don't think that that's really where he's best suited. And I think the shot selection is going to be a big deal. Like, he talked about, Pop hasn't yelled at me too much. And I'm sure that'll continue to be the case. Like, he's the big guy in town now, but, like, there's some shots that you look at and you're like, that, I don't know why you took that. Like, I know you took it cause you can, but like, the efficiency on that is super low. And, like, there were guys who were open. I just think I'd rather see them kind of ease him into a primary role than just, like, force feed him the ball and be like, you're the guy. You're getting 18, 19, 20 shots every night. Like, I'm fine if they kind of just use him as a play finisher, and let him self-create every once in a while. That's what I think would be nice to see from him.
Yeah, it's kind of a catch-22 because he doesn't need to go anywhere with the ball because he's so big that he could just fire up over the top of everybody. But how efficient is that shot? Like you pointed out, what's the best way to utilize him as a play finisher, though? You mentioned, like, his base, his center of gravity, how strong he is not just yet. It's like using him, I guess, to pop off screens or to come around screens is fine, but what's the best way to get him going to the basket? Is it to use him as the primary screener or to use him as someone who's going to be, like, sort of more of the ducking guy or just be out in transition a ton so that he's not immediately having that impact on his body?
Yeah, and I think that's what we saw last night, right? And that's not necessarily an indication that he's going to do that forever, but, like, he was mostly on the perimeter defensively, and then, after the shot, he was leaking out. He was leaking out every time, and I think they really want to get him going in transition because it's like, how do you stop that? How do you stop that? Unless you have someone who's, like, similarly sized to him, you're not going to. And, like, guys would, they'd be with him right there. Like, there was Lou Dort with him. There was Osman Dang with him yesterday. And all he did was give them a ball fake. They're up in the air, and he dunked it. Like, there's nothing you can do about that. Now, they used him as a screener a little bit, like in the pick and roll, and I love seeing that. Like, he was really effective as a roll man with Metropolitans 92 last season, and I think he'll be fine in the NBA. But again, as you mentioned, like, it's all about managing his body, like taking a load off of him a little bit. And I think we're also going to see some pick and pop action with him. Like, we didn't see too much of that last night, but I anticipate they'll let him do that because as poor as he's shot from three, like, as a professional, I do believe in the shot. And I think the Spurs do as well. And, like, if he's going to have any hope of developing that shot, the best reps are in-game reps. Like, regardless of the percentage, let him get those shots up. So we'll see. It's going to be interesting during the season to just kind of evaluate, how did they use him? How does that change throughout the year? But I kind of believe Pop when he says, I don't know. Because if I'm being 100% honest, I don't know either. Like, there's just so many possibilities. And I don't know that there's necessarily a wrong way to use him, but it's going to be a whirlwind this season. Like, I really don't know what to expect. I'm just excited to whatever happens is going to happen, and that's what's going to be on the court.
Looking at the other side of the floor, rookies are notoriously bad on defense. In recent years, we've seen that flip a little bit where it's like Tari Eason comes in, Evan Mobley comes in, Walker Kessler comes in. Do you envision Wemby being that type of player, and what's sort of most intriguing to you about what he's able to do immediately as a defensive player?
Yeah, I think he should have a pretty immediate impact defensively. I mean, I think he's got really good instincts as a rim protector, even if he's not really, like, sitting in the paint, because we did see him a lot yesterday, as I mentioned, kind of like roaming, on those guys who are like your third, fourth options who are on the perimeter, as opposed to, like, banging bodies down low. Mm-hmm. He was still able to, like, rotate over and cover so much ground and come up with, like, contests, even if he wasn't blocking shots, like contesting shots, altering shots. And then when he was in the paint, it's like guys don't want to go near the rim. Like, they're driving and they're immediately kicking out. They don't want any part of that. It was also really incredible. I don't know if you saw it, but there was a play where he was basically stationed at the top of the key on the 3-point line, and he digged for the ball, right, on a drive that was already deep in the paint, and he got it with his 8-foot wingspan, dislodged the ball. It is a fast break going the other way. And I was like, I don't think I've ever seen someone, like, you see guys dig from the nail pretty routinely, and, like, they get a hand on the ball, or at least they're able to force an early pickup on those drives. I've never seen someone do that from, like, all the way at the 3-point line. Like, it was crazy. So I think he will be impactful. Now, there were moments where he's, like, gambling and he missed, but, like, he's a rookie. Like, that's going to happen. And I think they'll give him the freedom to do that and make mistakes. But I think he will be impactful, though I don't think he's going to spend a lot of time necessarily, as we've seen. Like, he's not going to spend a lot of time in the paint. I think, banging bodies with the Joel Embiids, with the Nikola Jokic's, with the Jonas Valanciunas'. I think he mostly will be on the perimeter, so that should be really fun to watch too, because I thought he did a pretty good job last night.
Yeah, and his block radius is just basically if he's I can't remember who he blocked, and I hope I didn't dream this, but I saw it from the Thunder game, I believe. He was at the free throw line and just swatted the shot away from behind. And it's just that's absolutely ridiculous. Do you see him when you're looking at how the Spurs have chosen or been forced to defend the last couple of years? Do you see him changing anything about them? You mentioned what Devin Vassell is able to do away from the ball. Now you have Wemby. Trey Jones, he's a pretty good presser, and you have Jeremy Sochan. That could be a pretty dangerous foursome defensively if you're willing to play a little bit more aggressively because you trust that Vassell and Wemby are just going to cover everything up. If you want Jeremy Sochan and Trey Jones to maybe play press a little bit more.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree with you. I think that is exactly what it's going to allow the Spurs to do. And I wouldn't be surprised if this team goes from, historically, literally the worst defensive rating in NBA history to being a top 15. I don't know if I could say top 10. I want to so bad, but I think the inexperience, the lack of chemistry so far, they've got to, build that up. But I do think that they can be in the top half of defenses this year. I really think they have a ton of versatility. We haven't even talked about guys like Zach Collins. We haven't talked about Julian Champagnie. We haven't talked about Blake Wesley, who we'll see if he gets minutes this season. I'm not really sure where he is, and we might talk about him later, but I think they've got a lot of really intriguing pieces. And I also think it's going to help a guy like Keldon Johnson. Keldon Johnson has struggled on the defensive end since he's come in the NBA. And I think if you just have a little bit of pressure relieved from him, knowing that he can be a little bit more aggressive, and it's all right if a guy gets by him, that it's not the end of the world, that it's not, going to force everything around him to collapse. And now you're facing, a compromised defense. I think that's going to be huge for Keldon Johnson too. Regardless if he makes big strides like he's promised, he's talked a big game, he wants to be better on the defensive end. Whether or not that happens, I don't think it matters that much. I think it's just going to make life easier for everyone, which is a great thing. That's going to be a great thing.
I don't get bogged down by positions anymore, but when you're kind of going through the Spurs depth chart, there's Wemby, there's Zach Collins, and then it's is this team invested in Mamu? Is this team invested in Khem, Birch? Are we going to see Charles Bassey's there too? Are we going to see fairly frequent instances where Wemby is the lone big on the court, or is that something they're going to try and insulate him against this season?
I think it's going to be something they insulate him against this season. I mean, it was during the offseason, the only real thing that Brian Wright talked about or even mentioned was they were interested in looking at bigger bodies who could help Wemby hold down the fort down low so that he's not taking punishment every single game. They didn't really do that, right? They didn't really go out and sign or trade guys, but they have big bodies like Mamu. They have Charles Bassey. They have Zach Collins. I don't think Khem Birch is going to make the final cut, if I'm completely honest. I think he's gone, but they have enough big bodies so that he doesn't have to be the lone big. They may experiment with it, but I think they're going to try to keep him away from that. I think they really are heavy on trying to preserve his body and not fill him out too quickly. That was another thing. It's okay, he's added 15 pounds of muscle, but they don't really intend to add more this season. They just want to maintain and get him in good shape. So I think that's, just preserving his body. Because I don't remember who tweeted this out yesterday, but it was of the 50 players or so that have been over 7-2 in NBA history, only 12 of them have played more than 5 seasons in the NBA. So they're going to be careful with him. They have to be.
I think that's smart. There may be certain matchups where if OKC is playing Chet as the lone big, or if you're going up against the Nets and they have Nick Claxton as the lone big, where if you want to try it, those are not going to be as punishing matchups. But I think that's a smart route to go. It's just I look at their big man rotation and there's so much ambiguity behind Zach Collins. I was just curious, is that the vision? I'm happy to hear that it is not, because I want Wemby to be in the league for the next 20 plus years personally. Is there? So twofold question here. Let's start with the good. Is there anything under the radar that he does people aren't talking about just yet that you think is going to translate, or you're just super interested to see, or you think that maybe is going to catch people off guard this season about Wemby?
I think the facilitating, the court vision, the passing, I think he's a legitimately great passer. I think he's one of the best passers from this draft class. Some of that is, he has so much gravity as a scorer, just being a big body. People are going to have all eyes on him. And so there's going to be openings and he's going to be able to take advantage of those. But he's got some flash to him too, like behind the neck, behind the back, wrapping around other guys' bodies. Like there's a lot of craft there. There's a lot of creativity there. And I think that'll probably catch some people off guard. Like I know yesterday he finished with 0 assists, but there were several passes that like led to guys getting to the free throw line or guys just, they just didn't sink an open shot. And like, that's going to change. He's not going to have 0 assists every game. It's one preseason game. But I think just even looking at the tape with Metropolitans 92, you look at some of the stuff that he did where he was able to drive and kind of like wrap the ball around other guys, like during summer league. I think that will be a huge thing to watch out for this season. And I think it'll surprise some fans. Cause I think right now, a lot of people just see him as like a big body running down the court. He can dunk, he can shoot a bit, but I think the passing is easily one of his strengths.
I think it's safe to say he'll be able to see over every single defender that he faces, which should help out there. Anything Wemby related we haven't talked about? We already hit on some concerns. I was going to ask you about that, but his body type, some of the shot selection you mentioned, how they're going to use him. Is there anything just about Wemby that we haven't discussed yet you'd like to touch on?
Maybe just real quick, I everything that he's said, it's been like perfect. And like, I know these guys are like media trained and they all know what to say, but it's like everything that has come out of his mouth has been like a dream for Spurs fans. Like he loves Tim Duncan. He admires David Robinson. He wants Greg Popovich to yell at him. He wants Greg Popovich to coach him hard. He wants Greg Popovich to give him any advice possible. And even last night, he had like 20 points, 5 rebounds, a block, a couple steals, something like that last night on really good efficiency. One of the first things he said in his press conference was like, but I can be better. I don't know that there's a lot of guys who are like, oh, I just had a great game, but I can be better. And I just love that from Wemby. Like he has this like hunger and humbleness to him that is just really, I guess, like relatable. It's easy to root for. Mm-hmm. And I think that, that's something that Spurs fans grew really accustomed to with like Tim Duncan, with David Robinson, these like humble superstars who want to be better, who want to be coached. And he kind of is just like the perfect mold, the perfect guy to fall in line after those guys. So I think if there's anything that I wanted to highlight, it would be that. I just have been really impressed by his maturity.
The thing I'm interested in, and it sort of dovetails with what you said, and this is, we knew this about him coming into the NBA, is he wants to play, and he wants to play a lot. And so if there's a scenario later in the season where they want to shut him down because he's not going to fit, unless he makes the All-Star game, he's not going to fit that star criteria, they're going to be safe. And it's in a way that won't cost him Rookie of the Year votes. Or if they want to even sort of rigidly monitor his minutes, where it's we don't want you playing more than 32 minutes a game or something, I'm very curious to see how he reacts to that. I'm sure he'll just kind of eventually understand because of how much more basketball he will be playing in the aggregate. But I'm just, whenever there's a personality where that they just want to play, and I know rest has been a big part of his program leading into the NBA when you talk about sleep and nutrition, but when you want to play that badly, I'm curious whether anything could come of that I'm more curious, like later season route, where they want to give him like the last few weeks off, how he'll react to something like that. Maybe he hits a rookie wall. He's like, yeah, fine, whatever. But he just doesn't seem like he's wired that way to go out of the lineup very quietly.
Yeah, no, I know that during the summer league, like at the California Classic, like he really wanted to play at the California Classic, and they were like, dude, you just played an entire season. You got all the way to the L&B Pro A finals. Like, take a couple weeks off and we'll fit you in Las Vegas Summer League. And he was like, okay, yeah, like, I'll take the rest. I'm excited to join my teammates in Vegas. And then it was like he played 2 games and he was like, well, the Spurs told me I needed to, take a vacation. And so that's what I'm going to do. It kind of felt like begrudgingly, but I think he understands it. Like he's pretty mature. I think he understands that like they're doing this for the betterment of his career, like to extend his career. And I think it's easy, like if you're Wemby and you look at the history of the Spurs with Tony and Manu and Timmy, like those guys sat out of like 15, 20 games a season near the end of their careers, and it just extended their careers. And like, it's hard for a guy like that who's young and I'm sure is hungry to play, but I don't think there's going to be problems. But it is going to be kind of interesting. How does he respond to that? Because it's easy to do it at the beginning, but like after having not missed a single game last year, like it'll probably be hard to say, yes, I'll sit out. So yeah, that'll be something to watch out for sure.
I haven't seen anything definitive on this. Do we have a sense of what the starting lineup is going to look like, Birch?
No, not at all. And that's been like kind of my biggest question for this team is like, who starts and who sits? At first, I really thought, okay, it's between Keldon Johnson and Jeremy Sochan. One of those guys is going to the bench. But in the last couple of weeks, it's been like, well, it might be Trey Jones. Like,
oh, wow.
It could be Trey Jones. And it could just be being Pop and like just being short with the media, but they asked him at media day, like, who's going to be your point guard this year? And he's like, I don't know. We don't have any position set. And then it became, well, like, who could play point guard? And he's like, well, anyone could play point guard, basically. Like Tre Jones can play point guard. Vassell can take the ball up. Keldon could take the ball up. Sochan could take the ball up. Wemby could take the ball up. We run a lot of offense through the top of the key through Zach Collins. Point guard doesn't matter, is basically what it felt like he was saying. Like, I'm not putting words in his mouth. He didn't actually say that, but it felt like he was, like, open to anything. And so in recent weeks, I've been like, man, could it be Tre Jones? Like, could Tre Jones be the guy who kind of gets the boot into the second unit? But after last night, I don't know. It kind of feels like maybe it's an outdated way of thinking, but having a guy who can kind of control the tempo of the game, who actually is like a primary ball handler, I feel like that's somewhat important, because I love Vassell, I love Keldon, I love Sochan. I don't know if they're ready to handle that sort of responsibility on like a per game basis, like every single game. I just don't know if they're ready for that in the same way that like Tre Jones has already proved he can handle that. Even if he's not like a transcendent player or a game breaker, he definitely sets the table for guys in a way that I'm not really sure anybody else can at the moment.
When I was putting together this outline, I was looking on the internet to see if Pop or anyone had said anything about the starting five, and I came across, I can't remember the outlet, an article where they'd said that Tre Jones might be the guy who's not starting. And I thought it was fan fiction, because I was just like, how are they not going to start him? And now that you said that, I'm like, wow, that would be, I wouldn't hate it, but like I kind of, and then you have Tre Jones like running bench units, provides some stability there. But I think when I last talked to you, I said I would probably make it Keldon Johnson. The more I've thought about it, I'm like, I'd probably just like to see Jeremy Sochan come in and just run the second unit. You can play him with the starters a bunch still, but I do just benching Tre Jones is not something I'd consider, because he is, after his suspension, there's Devonte Graham, of course, but like Tre Jones is like the best playmaker on this team right now. So I always just assume that, oh no, he's going to be in the starting five.
Yeah. And like, it's not set in stone or anything like that. And I definitely, I'm right there with you. Like, the more I've thought it over, the more I'd kind of like to see Keldon in the starting lineup, because if he's not there, it's like, how much shooting do you really have? Like, I trust Devin Vassell as a shooter 100%. Like, I think he is a guy who can hover near that 40% on like 7 or 8 attempts per game. We've seen that last season. But like, Tre Jones, not really a shooter. Sochan's not a shooter. Collins had his best shooting season, but like, he even had kind of a shorter season because he was injured last year for a little bit. Mm-hmm. And like Wemby too, like he's a guy who hasn't shot above 27% in any of his professional seasons. Like, I feel like Keldon is a guy who I do trust as a shooter. Like, he doesn't have a ton of versatility as a shooter, like Doug McDermott. Like, he's not a guy who's like sprinting around pin downs, or he's not like, running in transition, catch and shoot, relocating. He's mostly just like a stationary shooter, catch and shoot guy. But like, that's important. If you don't have a guy who can at least space the floor reliably, like that's going to shrink the floor. So I feel like he has to be in the starting lineup. So I think that for me is like, what does this starting lineup look like? And when are we going to see Keldon, and when are we going to see Jeremy Sochan? Because they sat out of the silver and black open scrimmage. They sat out of the first preseason game with what was called general soreness. So like, I want to see them, because I want to know, like, what does the starting lineup look like with them, without them? Like, I just feel like we have plenty of time, but I'm eager to see, like, what does that look like?
Do you think the way the offseason unfolded, and for the reasons you just mentioned, that we had talked about how Keldon Johnson's future with this team might be a little hazy given his makeup, but given the need right now for, I would say, longer term shooting, because Cedi Osman comes off the books after this year, Doug McDermott comes off the books this year, does that actually kind of maybe increase the importance of Keldon Johnson, because you want that spacing around Wembanyama specifically?
It might. I still kind of feel like Keldon Johnson is a little bit of like the odd man out. Like, he was their go-to scorer last year, and I think he did a really admirable job in that role, because I think he was just kind of forced fed into that role. Like, he didn't really have an option. Like, they needed him to be that. But in that same breath, like, he's just a guy who, I think I've talked about it a few times on the podcast. Like, I'm not out on him. I don't think he's a bad player by any means. Mm-hmm. I just don't really know what he looks like scaled down. But I do know that, he's probably not suited for like that number 1 or number 2 role. He's just not that dynamic of a scorer. Like, he's mostly just a downhill guy, coming off of dribble handoffs, running in transition, not a great self-creator, not a great mid-range shooter. Like, the 3-point percentage tapered off a little bit last season. I think that more had to do with all the attention on him, but like, I just don't know. Like, I have no idea what the Spurs think of him. They seem to love him, and like, he's a great leader. I will absolutely give him that. I think he's the best leader on this team, but I still feel like he could possibly be the odd man out. Like, Because if he's not, who is? Like, is it Jeremy Sochan? Like, is their plan to just keep Jeremy Sochan on the bench? You know what I mean? Like, it just seems like a personnel like crunch right now.
It's not like a positional thing so much as unless you're planning to play Devin Vassell or Jeremy Sochan as your point guard, like it's just that's where you're going to run into the crunch. Like, is Keldon Johnson a career bench player? I think he's probably better than that, and that's where you start to run into the crunch with. For people who didn't listen to the podcast we did after the draft lottery, what most impressed you about Jeremy Sochan's rookie season?
Yeah, love Jeremy Sochan. I think for me, it was the playmaking a little bit. Like, I don't think I expected that to be such a big part of his game. And like, I know that's kind of an odd thing to say, maybe because I think he only averaged about 3 assists per game, but just like the general playmaking was really impressive. And I also thought his willingness to kind of do anything and everything to improve, like, it may seem trivial, going to the one-handed free throw. It's not that big of a deal, but I think it is a big deal because it shows
percentage like doubled.
Yeah. It went from like 47% to like 78%. It was an insane increase. And like, to me, it just shows he's willing to do whatever it takes to get better, and he doesn't care what people think. And I think that's generally his attitude, right? Like, he doesn't care what you think. He's going to get in your face. He's going to be scrappy. He's going to play, like hard-nosed defense. He's going to get under your skin. Like, I just love everything about Sochan, but really the thing that impressed me most was the playmaking. And I'm intrigued to see where that goes from here. Like, how much responsibility do they put in his hands? Like, do they let him run the second unit if Tre Jones is in fact the starter? Like, we'll see. We'll see, because as you mentioned, Devonte Graham's suspended, I think, for like the first 3 or 4 games, which is only going to be a small sample size. But even if Devonte Graham is playing alongside of Jeremy Sochan, I think Devonte Graham is an excellent off-ball player. Like, he doesn't really need the ball in his hands to be effective.
It's about the only thing that he is bankable for at this point, too. So stationing him off the ball is probably a good idea. So what is is it just sort of the shooting? I know he said he's going to continue the one-handed free throw stuff, but what are you monitoring most closely in his development entering year 2?
Yeah, I kind of want to see, does the jump shot come around a bit? Now, he didn't have a super high volume, but I did write an article last year about, like, is the mid-range shooting just a flash, or is it a fluke? Is it just like going to be around for a couple of games? I think he only shot about 40% from mid-range last season, so it's not like he was like a world beater from that range, and it wasn't super high volume. But he seemed to be getting like more comfortable, pulling up off the dribble from mid-range, more confident, and he was knocking them down at a better rate down the stretch of the season. So, like, I'm interested to see, is that a real part of his game? Is that something he's going to pursue? Or is it like one of those things with Evan Mobley where you're like, he can shoot threes. Can he shoot threes? I don't know if he can shoot threes. Like, is that going to be like Sochan in the mid-range? Is he ever going to be a self-creator? Is he ever going to be a guy who can pull up off the dribble? Or is that just like something that they let him experiment with because they were so bad they had nothing to lose and they were like, screw it, go ahead, try it. So I'm interested to see, is that real, or is it gonna go to the wayside?
I kind of feel like there's a chance. I would hope that he could develop into, and he should get a ton of space for the next couple of years, the way that defense are guarding. Like, if he can just get some standstill looks off from deep, and I was like, he got up some floaters last year on the move too, and it's like that would be like huge. But that's just something I'm gonna be watching too. Is like, what are I don't want to call it just shooting because it feels like such a cliche, but it's like, how many levels can he score from is basically just like what I'm still sort of watching. And I think actually a big part of that might also be, we talk about the importance of having spacing around Wemby, but it's also going to be the importance of like having spacing around Jeremy Sochan as well, out in the half court anyway. Like, in transition, he'll do whatever, but like if you want him to get to the basket a ton in the half court, or to explore, like have enough space to explore the mid range, the floater area, like you're going to need to have like a pretty open floor around him. And I am curious, there are some lineups I think they can get to, especially if he's playing in the second unit, because some of their best shooters are coming off the bench.
Yeah, no, that'll be really, really fascinating to see. Like, what do they do? Who do they surround him with? Like you said, I mean, they've got Cedi Osman, they've got Devonte Graham, they've got Doug McDermott. Julian Champagnie is a really solid shooter in his own right as well. So yeah, like, what does that spacing do for him? We'll see. I don't know if I believe in him as a 3-point shooter. Like, even though he made strides throughout the year from the free throw line, I still felt like throughout the entirety of the year, it was very much like, I'm trying to find like the right word for it, for like how it looks like a catapult almost. Right. Like, I don't know if that makes sense, but his shot kind of looked catapulty. It was like pretty violent, even though it was like a long motion, not a ton of arc, not a ton of backspin on the ball. Like, every time he shot a three, like, and like, this is not meant to be any disrespect to Sochan. Love him. Like, he's one of my favorite players on this roster. I believe in him more than a lot of the guys on this team, but like I expected him to miss every time he took a three. Like I just didn't have any confidence in that shot. And I don't know that he did either. He didn't take a ton of them.
Right. You mentioned Julian Champagnie. Can we go through some of the just lesser, I'll say, known nationally players on this roster, and you can just give me some of your impressions, maybe what you think their role will be, if at all, this season. And let's start with Julian Champagnie, the NBA darling, Julian Champagnie.
I also love Julian Champagnie. He was fantastic down the stretch of last season. I think the last 5 games of the year, he averaged 20 points per game on 40% shooting from three on like 6 or 7 attempts per game. And at first I was like, well, I don't know if that's real. Like he didn't shoot that well in college, but he continued it in summer league. He didn't really continue it in the first game of the preseason, but like that's one game. I think he's a guy who potentially could be an upgrade over someone like Doug McDermott. Like he doesn't have the same shooting versatility, but Doug McDermott is such a like black hole on the defensive end, like just Ole defense, getting to the, like letting guys get to the rim. Like they've talked about like, hey, defense is our priority this year. We want to be better defensively, and love Doug. That's not Doug. So if you're trying to improve defensively, can he kind of usurp Doug McDermott in the rotation? Maybe, especially if they're able to kind of call other teams with an expiring contract. Maybe they want a guy to add to their playoff roster. They get a first rounder or something back for him, and then bam, you've got, Julian Champagnie in the rotation. So we'll see. I like him a lot, though. He is a guy who I believe in as a 3-and-D player.
Malaki Branham, who I become more intrigued by the more I think about him, and now it feels like the corner 3 just might be super bankable. I think he was only at 36% from there last year, and sort of just I saw some of what he did. I think it was the preseason game. Didn't he hit 2 corner 3s or whatever it was? But watching him, that on top of the push shot and his just comfort with self-creation and dribbling the ball. What do you think year 2 looks like for him?
I'm really high on Malaki Branham. He was a lottery prospect for me last year, so the fact that the Spurs got him with the 20th pick, I was like, that is a huge steal. We'll see what he does. He flashed some of it that rookie year, and I think this year he's going to be maybe given the keys to the second unit offense. Like it feels like he could be that guy who's self-creating, as you mentioned, right? Like he's a guy who's really smooth off the dribble, really patient in the pick and roll, knows how to get to his spots, rise up for those mid-range jumpers. I think in the same vein as like Devin Vassell, like getting to the rim more often would be great, but different from Devin Vassell is like when he did get to the rim last season, he was super efficient, really, really efficient. And then obviously the 3-point shot, like you hope that comes around. Like at Ohio State, he was a 44% catch and shoot 3-point guy. He shot 40% on all his 3-pointers. Like it was fairly good volume. I think it was like 5 or 4 attempts per game. I believe in the shot. I just think he kind of had to alter things a little bit because the game's faster in the NBA. There's better athletes in the NBA. There's longer athletes in the NBA. And so like he had quite a few of his threes blocked last year. And I think it's just about like, figuring out, do I have enough room to get that shot off and how can I speed up my release a little bit? And I think he's starting to figure that out. And like relocating has been huge too. Like just watching him relocate to the corner throughout the play, get open, catch, shoot, knock it down. Like I'm really excited to see him this season. I think he could be a guy who could sneakily average, maybe 10 or so points per game. I really believe in him.
How do you feel about him if you're going to play him heavily in the second unit, put the ball in his hands, like him as just a passer?
Yeah, I think he's pretty basic as a passer. Like to me, he's kind of in that same like level as Devin Vassell, where he's not really doing anything too advanced and he's not like super creative, but he does, he doesn't turn the ball over very much and he's able to hit, one man away. And that, that has value. And I think, maybe he can kind of extend that to becoming like a pick and roll playmaker or a guy who can like hit the roll man. Cause he hasn't really showed that too much. He didn't show that too much as a rookie. I think that would be huge, but we'll see. Yeah. I just, for now, I don't know that I would put the ball in his hands and just expect him to run the second unit offense, at least like facilitate. I think he could take a lot of the offensive burden, like scoring burden. I think it's important that he shares the playmaking burden for now. I just don't know if he's ready for that step yet.
What do we make of the human flash, Blake Wesley?
Yeah, I was really impressed with him in his first preseason game. One of the big like things for me with him is like slow down. Like there is definitely a time and place, right, to put those afterburners on and like get all the way to the rim, but he plays at 100 miles per hour every second.
The dials all go to 11. Yeah.
Like there's like no breaks there. There's absolutely no breaks. All gas, no breaks for him. And I think he did a really good job, like at the end of the summer league in this first preseason game, and showing that he can kind of be a little bit more patient, show a change of pace, and don't be so fixated on getting to the rim. Because I think for him, you go and watch the tape, like he is absolutely like one track minded. I'm getting to the rim. But it's like once he's there, there wasn't a plan. The plan was to get to the rim. And now that he's there, he's just forcing it. And like last summer league, he had more shots blocked than any player. In this summer league, he was still top 5 in shots blocked at the summer league. Like I still think he has some work to do, but he's starting to flesh things out. He's looking like his game is maturing a little bit, showing a little bit, like I said, change of pace. I think the shot could do a lot to unlock the rest of his game. Because right now, I don't think anybody's afraid of him pulling up from mid-range. Nobody's really afraid of him, as a catch and shoot guy. The floater is awful. Like he was like 21% on floaters last year. Like there's just no touch. And like that's the big thing for him is like you've got to develop touch. You've got to be able to change pace. You've got to be more patient. So I still believe in him a little bit, but out of all the prospects on the roster, I'm probably the lowest on Blake Wesley.
Feels like he'll probably have the most tamped down role of anyone we've mentioned so far too, if he hasn't won it at all on this club. The Sixers fans will not like this one, but Charles Bassey.
Charles Bassey. I actually was a little bit surprised that he got so many minutes last night. I was not really 100% sure if he was 100% healthy, and he looked good. Like he looked 100% healthy. Pop said he was 100% healthy. Great rebounder, solid rim protector. I think he has a little bit of touch on that mid-range jumper to maybe pick and pop a little bit, though that's, not as prevalent as it used to be. But I like him a lot. I think he's got that second unit spot locked down. Like I thought Sandro Mamukelashvili would have a chance to maybe lock it down at the start of the year, considering how well he finished the season. But I think it's Charles Bassey's job to lose at this point, and I think it's kind of a wide gap.
That makes me a little sad. I mean, I don't have anything against Charles Bassey, but I'm in love with Mamu now. Just officially, just every time, like seeing someone his size being able to take like 3 dribbles in, then just like spray the ball over all different areas of the court. I'm probably way too high on him at this point, but does he have a chance to like play a real role on this roster?
I'm right there with you. I hope he does. I don't know where the minutes come from to get him a real rotation role on this
Charles
team.
Bassey. I'll take him from you. I'm there. I'm sorry.
I would be fine with him taking minutes from Charles Bassey because I really do like Sandro Mamukelashvili. I think he's super creative passer. I think he's a good shooter. I think he's a guy who can kind of push the pace off of rebounds and kind of add like a different dynamic to the team as like a, if you want to call him a point forward or a point center, just a bigger playmaker. Like he just is able to play make from so many different spots on the floor. And I love seeing him out there. But in that same kind of like mold as Doug McDermott, like he just doesn't provide much on the defensive end. Like I think last season after he joined the Spurs, opponents shot 58% against him in man-to-man situations, which is just like you're basically a revolving door at that point. Like that's super efficient for the other team, not so great for your team. So it's tough. I think Charles Bassey just hasn't beat on the defensive end, and he's a guy who can throw down lobs, be a good roll man. I have a hard time seeing Sandro Mamukelashvili, replacing Charles Bassey, especially if Bassey is as healthy as Pop is saying he is.
Do you have any thoughts on Dominick Barlowe? I know a lot of people ended up being surprised that he stuck on a 2-way contract.
Yeah, well, so when you say surprised that he stuck, like that they brought him back or that he was just on a 2-way contract, like that's all?
Like he didn't get a real NBA deal.
Yeah, no, okay, awesome. Yeah, because I felt the same way. I was like, I'm kind of surprised that nobody around the NBA was like, let's get this guy on a standard contract. Like he is a little raw. He's definitely got some work to do, but just like the like idea of someone like Dominick Barlowe who can roll to the rim, who can shoot mid-range jumpers, who can knock down a catch and shoot 3, who can switch across positions, who runs in transition. Like he's such a smooth athlete for his size. Like the idea of him is really tantalizing. But he's another one of those guys who's like, where does he get minutes? And I'm assuming it's just going to be with the Austin Spurs. Like he had some really nice stretches down the end of last season. So did a lot of guys. Like, and that was mostly because, the Spurs were bad and like they were banged up. They were bad. They were resting guys. They were, they were fully invested in the Wemby sweepstakes. They've got him now. Like they don't really have a reason to sit guys more than they need to now. So as much as it kind of makes me sad that Sandro and Dom are not probably going to have a big role in this team, at the very least, Dom will have a big role in the G League, and we'll get to see him like for a ton of games, for a ton of minutes in a bigger role, kind of see how he's expanded his game.
You've already mentioned that you don't think Khem Birch is going to make the final roster, but just sort of looking at the vets who maybe aren't on the same timeline as the Spurs group, Cedi Osman, Doug McDermott, and Devonte Graham. How do you see their roles playing out? Who do you think winds up being the most important of those three?
I still think it's going to be Doug McDermott. Like, again, he's got the most shot versatility. Like we talked about, like he can, sprint around screens. He can curl around screens. He come off pin downs. He can shoot in transition. He can relocate to the corner. He can, cut to the basket. Like one of the things that Pop talks about with Doug McDermott is the idea of chasing space. Like he's just elite at finding cracks in the defense. Like he never stops moving. He moves with intent too. He's not just like wandering around the court. Like everything he does off ball has a very serious intent behind it. And like he's so good at just kind of drawing guys away, whether that's, kind of setting those ghost screens where he's drawing defenders because they're so afraid of his ability to shoot off screens. Like I just think he's a different level of shooter and off-ball threat than Devonte Graham or Cedi Osman are. And so for that reason, I kind of think he will be in the rotation to start the season, but wouldn't be surprised if like the Spurs pick up the phone or at least answer the phone if someone comes calling about his availability or Devonte's or Chedi's availability during the season.
He's someone too because of his off-ball movement, and it does depend on the lineups that he's in, and we haven't seen it as much in San Antonio, I think, because of the personnel, but we did see it a little bit in Indy when they started running some more spacier lineups. Like, he will give you that off-ball rim pressure too. And, like, I think Cedi can do that a little bit, but just given Doug McDermott feels a little stronger, that if they're able to open up the floor in the half court, that he becomes even extra dangerous just because of that, supplementary rim pressure that he could theoretically give you.
Absolutely.
Oh yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was just say absolutely. Like I just think again, like he's easily the most versatile player, at least offensively, out of those guys. And like I wouldn't be surprised like if someone went down with injury. Obviously, I'm not like wishing that upon anybody, but it's gonna happen. Like eventually someone's gonna miss games. I wouldn't be surprised if he's the guy who kind of goes into the starting lineup like we saw KBD did last year. Like KBD was the flex seal is what all the Spurs fans called him. Like anytime there was a problem, flex seal, you just throw him in there in the starting lineup. I kind of think that could be Doug McDermott this year, but we'll see. I'm not sure what his role is going to be, but it feels like he's the guy who's most likely to have a role out of all the veterans.
We are entering the cookie cutter portion of the podcast. Are you ready?
Sure, I'm ready.
Are there any strengths, weaknesses, anything flying under the radar about this team nationally that we still need to discuss?
I don't know that there's anything too big. There was a couple, I saw this on the rundown. So the two things I would say, maybe one, just their youth, their athleticism. Like they're going to be a team, like we saw them run in transition a lot, like leak out a lot last season. And they were, I think, top 4 or 5 in pace a year ago. I think we'll see the same thing again. Like just use that athleticism to your advantage, push the pace, push the tempo, get out in transition. Like I think that's going to be huge for this team. And like we saw it with Wemby last night, but it was there even before he got there. Like they were already a fast team before he got there. So I think that's a big thing. And then the other thing is like, Chip England, obviously he left for OKC last season. And so Spurs fans were like, what is going to happen with the shooting coach? Like there's no shooting coach anymore. Well, Jimmy Barron, who used to be the shooting coach over at IMG Academy, produced a ton of NBA players. He's the new shooting coach for the Spurs. And I think, at least for me, I'm really interested to see, how does that like translate for the Spurs in terms of like, how does he improve their shooting and like, who is he working with? Cause we know with, Chip England, he worked very hard specifically with like specific players like Kawhi Leonard, Tony Parker, DeJounte Murray. Like, does Jimmy Barron do the same thing for, Wemby or Sochan or Vassell? So I think that's going to be something that's interesting for Spurs fans to keep track of. But if we're talking nationally, probably just the athleticism, the youth, like just, pushing the pace. Like that's what they're going to be able to do.
I know they do this because they don't want to be in the half court, but I also just don't think people realize how fast and fun the Spurs have been the past couple of years. And it was last year, the only teams after a defensive rebound that were faster by average possession time were Sacramento and Indiana, which were 2 of everyone's league pass favorites. And like, it gets uglier with the Spurs, but now that they have Wemby and Jeremy Sochan in year 2 and Devin Vassell's healthier, like this team is fun. Like it's not just a Wemby thing. Like the way they play, which is, I don't want to say it's completely divergent to the way that Pop has coached in the past, but it's like sort of the antithesis to everything we know, where a lot of it was ball and body movement in the half court. And now it's like, no, we're just going to play like frenetic. This team is, and I'm not saying the other way the Spurs played was beautiful. I just don't know that they have the basketball veteran IQ yet to replicate that. And the game is just so much different. They're fast and fun. And so even if they're not efficient, even if they're not good, like it's fun to watch them play because there's just an unpredictability, again, even when it's not pretty, that I think you can appreciate aesthetically.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm really excited to see them push the pace. I'm excited to see them kind of like, I think in a little bit they probably will have the personnel to have some of that half court movement kind of come back and all the ball movement come back. Cause like, I don't know, maybe I might be, overestimating how good some of these guys are. Cause I watch this team more than any other team that I watch, but I think they have legitimately good passers, like at pretty much every position, like from Wemby to Zach Collins to Sandro Mamukelashvili to Trey Jones to like even Devin Vassell and like Malaki Branham are fine passers. And they've got guys who like move well without the ball, like Devonte Graham, Doug McDermott, Cedi Osman. Even Trey Jones is an excellent cutter. Like I think that they'll be a lot of fun. Like again, I think they were fun last year and I'm 100% on board with you that they were fun last year, but this year I think with more eyes on them, hopefully they will be a league pass favorite for a lot of fans. Cause I know the Spurs have been out of the national spotlight for like a half decade at least. So it'll be nice to have some eyes on them again.
So based off what you said, it feels like the top 10 and I think they'll futz and fiddle with their rotation a bunch, especially on the back end. But if you're looking at trying to forecast the 10 players who play the most on a regular basis, from what you say, it sounds like the locks would be Trey Jones, Devin Vassell, Keldon Johnson, Victor Wembanyama, Zach Collins, Jeremy Sochan, Malaki Branham, Julian Champagnie, Doug McDermott, and Charles Bassey are all locks, which would be 9 sewn up right there.
I think so. Yeah, I think those are probably the guys I would lock into roles. Like
I did not have Doug McDermott I know you saw the outline. I did not have him as a lock in my book. And so I guess I clearly did not understand his importance or intrigue to this team.
Yeah, it just feels like Pop has been very like loyal to certain veterans on these teams throughout the years. Like it's a different roster obviously than like the ones that had Rudy Gay and Patty Mills and DeMar DeRozan and like it is a different roster, but I still think Pop has like a special, like kind of maybe not a special place in his heart, but he trusts the veterans more. Like one of the things that we saw with the past iterations of these teams was like, why isn't Lonnie getting minutes? Why isn't even at the time like Josh Primo, why isn't he getting minutes? But guys like Rudy Gay and Patty Mills are every single game they're getting 20-25 minutes. Like I think Doug McDermott kind of is one of those guys who like Pop trusts. He knows the system. He knows he's probably the best off-ball mover on the team, and he has a ton of NBA experience. Like I just expect there to be a role for Doug McDermott, even if maybe he doesn't make sense long-term for this team.
Who would you think winds up taking a lion's share of sort of that 10th spot? I had Devonte Graham by default just because I thought they needed more of a proven backup playmaker. But if you trust Branham and if Sochan might be running the second unit, I'm curious whether like does Cedi Osman kind of inch his way into there? Is this just Mamu spot? We're going to play with a bunch of bigs anyway. Like who do you see competing for? I don't want to call it the final spot, but like the 10th most played spot on the season.
Yeah, I think it's probably Devonte Graham. Like it feels like if you're looking for like a steady playmaker, guy who doesn't turn the ball over a ton, like he's not super efficient and he's not a great defender, but like if you just want that steady veteran presence who what you're going to get every single night, like you're probably looking at Devonte Graham. Just because I have a hard time, like, and I would love to see it, and I know we're going to talk about wacky lineups maybe in a minute here, but like I just have a hard time seeing them playing like Cedi Osman and Doug McDermott together for long stretches.
Oh yeah.
And I also don't really see them playing Bassey and Mamu together for long stretches. So it kind of feels like it has to be Devonte Graham. Like maybe Blake Wesley can put his name in the hat there and like take that role away from him and prove something. But I still think Blake Wesley is like pretty raw. Like he needs some time to develop.
So, this is to some extent maybe matchup dependent. We don't even know their starting 5, so I won't even ask you if their best closing lineup, just their starting 5. What do you think ends up being their most used closing 5?
Yeah, so at least for me, I think the most used closing 5, it would probably be Trey Jones, Devin Vassell, Jeremy Sochan, Zach Collins, and Wembanyama. Like I just think that combination gives you at least enough shooting and offense to like get you by, but mostly there's no defensive liabilities there. And if they're like as serious about improving on the defensive end and making it tough for opponents to score this year as they say they are, which I'm sure every team is, serious about that. But like I kind of think it has to be that 5. Like I think it has to be that 5 if you really want to stop other teams from scoring. Because like last year you were letting teams average like 123 points per game on you, and you were terrible down the stretch. And like I think you have to go with a defense forward lineup like that.
You teased it. What's the wacky weirdo lineup that maybe they won't even try that you think that they need to try?
Yeah, I don't know that they'll try it. Actually, I'm like fairly sure they won't, but I would love to see a lineup of Branham, Champagnie, Osman, Mamu, and Bassey. Like, it's super weird, but I just think it would be fun to watch those guys out there together. Like, maybe give Branham some of that playmaking responsibility, can split it with Cedi Osman. He's a fairly good pick and roll playmaker. And then you've got a guy like Julian Champagnie who can play some defense, who can stretch the floor, who's been working on shooting with on the move. I really love Sandro Mamukelashvili. I think he could be fun as a playmaker from the high post, and it would be interesting. I don't know how it would work, but maybe get some high-low actions between him and Bassey. Like, it's funky. I don't think it's functional, but I would like to see them try it, at least in the preseason. Like, if they give that to me in the preseason, I'll be happy.
Mamukelashvili was in mine as well. So give me Mamu, Wemby, Jeremy Sochan, Devin Vassell, and Julian Champagnie. And so it's like Jeremy Sochan or Vassell kind of has to be your point guard in that. You're also going to need Champagnie or Vassell or Sochan to defend the point of attack. I don't really care. It's just so big. And I think that's the closest. Well, I guess because you could factor Trey Jones into that, but the shooting isn't weird. If you wanted 5 players who can all pass, dribble, and shoot as part of their skill sets, that's the closest you get, with the caveat that Jeremy Sochan and Wemby are like massive wild cards in that department. But I would that is a huge lineup. I think Vassell at 6'6" would be the smallest person in that group. So give me that lineup.
Yeah. And what's insane too is, I don't know if you saw, but like, you know, everybody, at least like Spurs fans, basketball fans, they love like tracking the height and weight and stuff of players every year. Somehow, I don't know, but like Julian Champagnie is 6'9" now. Like,
I didn't know he was supposed to be much smaller than that. Was he like 6'6" or 6'7"
last year? He was like 6'6",
yeah.
And now he's suddenly 6'9", which like I believe, because like him standing next to Sochan, they're basically the same height, and I think he's like 6'8" or 6'9". But yeah, it was just like, having never seen him played except for until last season, I was like, wow, I did not expect him to be like this big, and he moves so well for being that big too. So I think he's a guy who really, honestly, I would keep an eye on him. I'm a big believer in Julian Champagnie.
It's like, that's a growth spurt on par with Usman Jang, who was like 6'9" last year. He's listed, and they're saying he's like 7'1" now. And I looked at, someone showed me a picture of him standing next to Chet Holmgren. I'm like, oh yeah, like he's actually that big. So as we record this on October the 10th, their over-under is set at 28.5 wins. Are you taking the over or the under on that?
That's a tough one. I think I might take the over on that, but not by much. Like, I think max it's 29, 30 wins for this team. And like, I know a lot of Spurs fans are going to be upset at that. Like, they think we've got Wemby, this is a playoff team. I just don't think people realize like how good the Western Conference is. And like, pretty much every single team got better. And like, the Spurs got better, but they don't have that experience. They don't have the chemistry. They don't have the know-how. Like, I think they'll be competitive every night. I don't think they're going to be, you know, as bad as they were a year ago, but just because everybody else is so good, I can't see them doing more than like 30-ish wins. I wish I could say more, but I think that's as much as I can see them getting.
And the stuff I try to remember, because I get caught up in I think Wemby's going to be, again, a generational talent, one of the best players I've ever had the pleasure of watching. But like, even if he's great as a rookie, there's only so much. Like Luka Doncic, that Mavericks team won 33 games when he was a rookie, and he was fantastic. He averaged like 21-10 that year, whatever it was. He was at 21-6. Okay, so it's just like, even if Wemby is everything we think that he is, this roster's still in developmental mode. And so we haven't done our over-unders of the West yet. Actually, we might be recording it immediately after this podcast. Theirs is tough because like, I want to buy into the Wemby hype, and I love Devin Vassell and I love Jeremy Sochan, but they're still so young, and they're trying to figure out, I think, on both ends of the floor, what their guiding principles are going to be with this group. And there's like, let's not, mince word. Like, there's a chance that the Spurs there might be some tomfoolery by the end of the season, where like maybe they're on track to win 32 games, but they make sure that they only win 28.
Yeah, no, I could see that too. I mean, like, this is a team that like, they have so many draft picks and they own their own draft picks. Like, if you are kind of in that range where you think you're going to get a better draft pick this year, and there's really no incentive to keeping these guys out there, like, I could see them sitting guys. Like, they did it last year. Granted, it was for the Wembanyama sweepstakes, and there's nobody like of that caliber in this draft class. But like, I think they're still in that asset acquisition mode. And like you said, like just like trying to figure out what they have on both ends of the floor. So I want to buy into it as well. I want to say they're going to be in the playoffs. I want to tell fans that, but like, I just don't see it because this is such a tough conference. It's a tough conference. There's so many star players and superstar players that have, all-star, superstar counterparts or, co-stars on their team. And like, love Devin Vassell, love Sochan, love Keldon. Even if Wembanyama, again, is as good as advertised, like that's asking a lot from those other guys. Like they are still very young. So honestly, I'll just be happy if they go out there and they're competitive every night. Like that's all I really care about. I don't care too much about the win totals. I'll be fine either way.
Are you prepared though for if they come out the gate, let's say the first 20 games are like 11-9 or something? Are you prepared for the onslaught of national media members that are going to call for them to start making consolidation trades so that they can maximize the Devin Vassell and Wemby immediately?
Yes, I'm sure that will happen. I know even with Spurs fans last year when the team got out to a 5-2 start, they were like, oh, this is for real. They're not tanking this year. Like they are in it to win it. And I was like, hold up. Like they're shooting like 60% from three and other teams are shooting like 20% from three. I think there's going to be some evening out there and we'll see. But even there's some fans who are like 100% convinced that like, oh, had, Zach Collins not gone down and Jakob Poeltl not gone down, like we would have been like right there in the playoff mix. And look, like I'm happy to feed into that a little bit, but like, no, they're not that good. And like, they will be good. I think they will be good relatively soon, but for now,
the bones are in place. This team is just between Vassell and Wemby. I love Sochan, but I'm just so sure of Devin Vassell and Wemby. This team is going to be great one day. And I think the most instructive exercise to do is not to insult the Spurs. Like which teams in the West would you be guaranteed as of today to sit here and be like, the Spurs are going to be better than them? Because and I'm not trying to be an asshole. I came up with one, and it's the Blazers because I don't think they have some talent on that team, but they're going to deal some of those guys, and they're not going to try to win because they're in the first year of this post-Dame rebuild. And just like I'm kind of like I could see them being better than Houston. I think people need to kind of pump the brakes on like, okay, you have Fred VanVleet and Dylan Brooks, like that. You're not all of a sudden just like this competent organization now. Like I'd only be prepared to guarantee. And I don't even know how great I feel about it if you told me that the Blazers don't make a trade, but they'll be better than Portland. And I'm kind of like, I don't really know that I would guarantee another team after that.
Yeah, for me at least, I think they're going to be better than Portland. I think they might have a chance to be better than Houston, and I think they might have a chance to be better than Detroit. Like Cade Cunningham is coming back this year.
You told me they were better. Yeah, I was looking at just the West, like in the
East, just like the West.
Detroit,
well, then,
like those teams are like I have zero faith in like, them immediately for this season. But the West, because you point out how tough it is, it's like even the Rockets. I think the Blazers and the Spurs are the only two teams that are entering this season. And if you gave them truth serum, would say, no, we're not trying to make the playoffs. We're not going to make the playoffs. Every other team in the West probably legitimately fancies itself a playoff contender. That's tough. We'll see some people pull back as the season goes on, but that's just a tough hierarchy.
Yeah. And if we're just looking at the Western Conference, then it's probably like, I don't want to let anybody down. I love Spurs fans. Like I write to,
they'll be better than Washington. They'll be better than Washington. I could see them being better than Detroit. I don't know about Charlotte gets dicey if LaMelo stays healthy, but like there's a chance that they could be like the sixth worst team in the NBA.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see how good they are this year. I don't have a ton of confidence that they're like really actually pushing for the playoffs. I know Pop, like the last, maybe not this press conference for the preseason, but the one leading up to the preseason at Media Day was like, development last year is as important as getting wins this year. Like, I don't know how much I believe that. But like, I hope that's the goal. Like, I hope that's the goal for every team, but you can say that and still not have the means to win those games. And I just don't think they have the means to win the games yet, which is okay.
It was totally fine. Is there anything I haven't asked you about, we haven't touched upon, that you think should be hit before I let you go?
Just a quick shout out to Sidy Cissoko. I really like him. I had him as a first round guy in this draft class. Like, so again, like he was one of my guys. I'm really excited to see what he does in the G League, because that is basically what the plan has already been set for him. He's going to spend time with the Austin Spurs, but he's a funky guy. Like he doesn't have a lot of utilization right now in the half court because he can't really shoot the ball, stand still or off the dribble. But in transition, huge beast there. really good as a short roll playmaker. Also, just when he can get downhill, he's got some, strength that he can, just bowl through guys and get to the rim and finish at the rim. So like he's a guy who I think could be really interesting in a couple of years for the Spurs. He's still only 19 years old. And as I said, he's going to spend most of the season in the G League. But if you watch any G League games this year, keep an eye on him because I think he's going to be a lot of fun. Like he was really good with the G League Ignite last year. I think he'll be equally fun with the Austin Spurs this season.
Noah, this was great. Are you able just to tell our listeners where they can find you and all the great work that you do?
Yeah. So you can find me on Twitter at or X, whatever you want to call it, _Magaro-MAG. Yes, but you can find me on Twitter at _Magaro-MAGARO. You can find my writing over at AirAlamo. You can find my podcast at Alamo City Limits, wherever you get your podcast. We're going to get that started up soon. But thank you so much for having me. Like I had a blast talking about the Spurs. Absolutely cannot wait for this season to start.
Well, thank you so much. You gave me almost 75 minutes. You gave me 75 minutes of your time. I really appreciate it. It was a fun conversation. I love picking your brain. Congrats on the nuptials once again. I think, as you know by now, I'll be spamming your DMs.